Hey, there we are. We are live, and welcome to everyone who is tuning in live to our, every other month or so, Mobile Internet Resource Center, a live stream broadcast where we dive into some sort of fun topic, usually with a guest. And this time, the guest we have is Andrew McNabb, who has been one of our longtime team members here at Mobile Internet Resource Center. Andy, do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about your RVing and mobile internet history?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris. It's great to be here. It's been great to be part of the MIRC team for so long. I originally got involved with MIRC when my family and I were going full-time RVing, and we needed a internet solution. And I found the Mobile Internet Resource Center, and eventually landed a job doing this. So it's been pretty exciting. I'm not full-time anymore. My kids decided they wanted a normal high school life, so we're settled down and we do part-time RV several times a year and in the summer. So
Yeah, but we still love you, even though you're a part timer. You have become such an indispensable piece of the Merck team. I think you're almost some ways kind of like the foundation that keeps Merck running in so many ways. We love working with you, and in particular, the topic for today's Merck Live is we're diving deep into kind of the state of the mobile internet world, the cellular internet world. That you took on the massive job of kind of our state of cellular connectivity update that we do every so often. So for those who want to follow along in the written version of this, it's over at rvmobileinternet.com/2025 dash cellular. This is a kind of a big snapshot update on the state of 5G, looking at the modems that are out there, how they're evolving, the modems that are available for cellular routers, then diving into how the cellular carriers networks have been evolving and changing, and then looking to the future of how 5G and satellite are coming together, and then also what's the future 6G, what is 6G all about. So that's the article version of it, and now we're going to kind of do the video companion. I'm going to be talking to Andy about this amazing article that he's put together, and so let's dive into that. Sound good? There
sounds
we are.
great.
Now, tell us about what is a modem, and why is a modem so important to, isn't it just 5G? Is there more to it than that? What's behind the scenes here?
Oh, if it were only that simple. Yes, there is 5G, but not all 5G is created equally. There is a group out there, the 3GPP, that does all the standards for 5G and also 4G before that.
Hmm.
And these standards come out in phases. So 5G just isn't born fully formed
Right,
into adulthood. It it has to develop over time. And so the first 5G standard was Release 15, which was
right,
5G Phase One.
right. That's
And
the reason it is release 15, because this is not release 15 of the 5G standard. It was release 15 of, well, the industry consortium that puts this all out is the 3GPP. That's the 3G partnership. Yes, the 3G partnership project, because it's all came together when the industry years and years and years ago, working on 3G standards all independently, said we really should do something interoperable so that phone manufacturers can build 3G hardware that works with carriers around the world. So the 3G partnership project is made up of carriers and hardware manufacturers all around the world who work to define what is the cellular standards. And through the 3G era, and then the 4G era, and now the 5G era, had been up to this point 15 different technical standards that get kind of the marketing label 5G slapped onto them. And you want to maybe describe some of, like, why are we paying attention to Qualcomm's modems when it comes to understanding what's up with all the 3G standards?
yes, well, we use Qualcomm's modem sort of as the benchmark for the various compatibility with the standards releases and as well as performance. And that's just because Qualcomm completely dominates the cellular modem market these days. There are some other people making cellular modems. Apple just came out with a phone with a cellular modem. MediaTek's another company that makes modems for routers and data-only devices. Even Samsung has its own modem, but really Qualcomm dominates the market, and their naming scheme makes it very easy to compare the different generations of modems.
Right. So yeah. So we've been tracking. Qualcomm has led the way. Every year they kind of bring out their new flagship modems. Usually it is then Samsung who brings out a flagship phone. Usually the Galaxy version that comes out in January every year is the first of the year that brings out the next generation of cellular technology, and then that is the phone that the cell carriers then use to test and make sure their networks are working, as other devices then follow along throughout the year with that same chip. And then as the years follow, that chip becomes mainstream, and every year there's a new flagship pushing the cutting edge. And so we've been kind of using Qualcomm is the benchmark every year of, like, what is possible with 5G. And we've going to kind of quickly go through the history here of what we've seen. First off, the first 5G devices we saw was based on the Qualcomm X50 modem. And I remember writing the articles about this at the Mobile Internet Resource Center, telling people, hey, this is a 5G device, but do not buy this. This is not something that you want to get. Anything with the X50 in it is instantly going to be obsolete. And that indeed was the case, because the X50 was a modem that had only 5G and only very limited 5G capabilities. It was just basically proving out the technologies, and it needed a separate 4G modem. So you had to have two chips and all that extra power consumption and everything else. And fortunately, the X50 didn't last long, but the X55 has lasted a long time. That is the second modem of the Release 15 standards. And you want to talk about, like, all the devices we've seen with the X55? It's still around in some of them, aren't they?
Yes, the X55 is probably the most prolific modem out there now, especially for data-only devices. It's still very commonly seen in some cellular routers and other devices, and it still is a decently capable modem, although it does have some shortcomings compared to newer modems.
Yeah. Yeah, so what we've done a bunch of coverage about, like, the reasons why the 55 was the first 5G modem worth considering, but it had some major things holding it back. And so what's now the first modems of the phase 2 generation are the X62 and 65. And this is where the naming scheme got a little bit confusing, because Qualcomm has been counting by five every generation, so 50 to 55 to 60. Then the next generation, they came out with the 65, and then the 62 is the same generation as the 65. It's just the cost reduced, lower performing sibling of that. And so we're kind of in this era of, for when it comes to routers, and we're going to be talking about this more in the next slides, where the 62 is what's been in most new cellular devices we've recommended over the past year. And we're now just coming into this year, the X65 is becoming the chip of choice, and there's new devices with the X65 available, but they are basically the same generation. They're from the Release 16 standards, which the industry calls 5G Phase 2. Um, and that's kind of the what's going mainstream. The other thing that seems to be the pattern with Qualcomm devices is the odd the even number years are the devices that or the five generations, the 65, the 55, and in the next 75 are the generations that are going into routers and mobile internet devices. The even number years, or the 0 years, are the generations that are only primarily used in smartphones. So we're definitely seeing that pattern continue. So we saw a lot of routers with X55. We're seeing routers now with the 65 and 62. And then going ahead, what's the next generation is Release 17. Let's talk about the 72 and the 75, and maybe what is reduced capacity.
Yes, well, the 72 and the 75, they're the next generation, and that's 5G Phase 2 Part 1. So it gets a little bit confusing on this naming here, but it's more of an iterative change from the previous Release 16, and it does provide some improved capabilities as well as some additional features. So the X72 and X75, they do have performance improvements over the previous generation, but that release also has what's called red cap or reduced capability 5G, and that's represented there with the X35 modem from Qualcomm. Now, what red cap is it is a lower cost, reduced performance 5G standard so that you can put a 5G connection in more types of devices and do it more cheaply. And what we expect is that 5G RedCap is going to replace some of the lower end LTE devices and things like USB modems. There's already a USB modem out now with the X35 modem, as
Yeah.
well as lower end mobile hotspots, etc.
Yeah, this is what's going to kind of push 4G out of the market, because you can build RedCap or RC devices with a modem like this. They're not going to be high performance. They're not going to be squeezing all the performance that 5G is capable of, that the higher end modems can do, but they can be made very cheaply and they will still perform very, very well compared to 4G devices. So this is the excuse for the market to finally put 5G on even the lowest end devices, which will be good. And because the 5G technology is not all just about performance. A lot of what the 5G networking technology allows behind the scenes is to make more battery efficient devices, things that are will have better battery life and can perform very, very well with minimal power consumption. So that's been a focus of the Release 17 standards, and that's kind of where we're teetering to. But what we're actually just now seeing this is as we go into 2025, is the first of what is called 5G Advanced, and this is following the same marketing terms. Whereas midway through the 4G generation, 4G Advanced came out, and that was just another iteration of the standards, and that was kind of the big second wave of 4G devices that was more the premium and pro line, but they coexisted with just regular 4G for the longest time. And that's going to be the same way with 5G. Is going forward, the Release 18 standard defines 5G Advanced. It's taking 5G performance to kind of the highest level it will go. There'll be a couple iterations of the 5G Advanced standard, but until 6G comes along. So any modem that is in the phase 2 generation, or 5G advanced generation, is probably going to be pretty solid option all the way up until 6G comes along. And particularly the X72 and 75 and 62 and 65 will have really good long legs. But what has just been announced by Qualcomm is the 82 and 85. Those will be the just announced chips just a few weeks ago, right, at the Mobile World Congress. And that's, go ahead.
No, yes, we don't have a lot of information about them because they were just announced. There wasn't a lot of technical details out on them yet, but similar to the X62, 65, 72, 75, these are slated to be the modems for the Release 18 that are primarily going to be seen in data only devices
Yeah.
like routers and mobile hotspots.
Yeah.
However, it's going to be a couple of years probably before we
Hmm.
start to see that because uh, the way the technology works is these new generations always come out on smartphones first, the flagship smartphones, and
Yeah.
then it takes quite a while for them to get all the approvals and everything
Yeah.
necessary to work in
Into
routers and
right.
data only
So
devices.
right now, just basically in the last few months, the first of the X80 devices, the Qualcomm Galaxy S25 Qualcomm's, not Samsung's highest end smartphone, the Galaxy S25, just came out with the X80, which was announced a year ago. And so that's now the very first devices shipping with that super flagship 5G advanced modem. But we will see that same pattern continue. But now let's dive into more what's happening in the world of in modems for routers, because this is, you can always dive into the specs of any cellular device, figure out what modem it has, and that'll give you a chance to understand the capabilities. But we're focused on mostly on a lot of connecting via routers at the Mobile Internet Resource Center, and those are so far behind. So what's happening in 2025 is the X65. You want to talk about why that took so long?
Yes, well, unfortunately, it takes quite a while for the modems to get into routers, and a big reason for that is that production capacity is limited. The smartphone manufacturers who have high volumes, they always get the priority. And then with these newer modems, to put them into a router, they have to be made into a cellular modem module. So not just the cellular modem, but they have to have a little bit of electronics to sort of control the modem and be able to integrate it with router hardware. So that takes time. And then there's all the certifications with like the FCC in the United States, where you have to get the modules certified. And then once you get the modules certified, then you have to get the router certified. And
And
then there's carrier certification. Some manufacturers won't release products until they're actually certified by the carriers. So all these steps can take a lot of time.
And that is part of the reason why router manufacturers don't want to be on a yearly cadence. They don't want to put out new updates every year, and they don't want to put out updates that are on the bleeding edge because they're not pushing out over-the-air firmware updates like a cell phone company does. Like a cellular handset company does. Things that are deployed for enterprise customers, they need to have very slow, steady, stable updates. And so it's actually considered by the router manufacturers more of a feature than a bug that they're on the lagging end of the standards. But the X62 and X65, that iteration of 5G is a really kind of solid technical future-proof standard, and we're excited to see the X62 has been in devices for over a year now, and now we're seeing the X65, the higher end, bigger brother of the 62, being announced in routers. Then we're there's a very interesting range of them that are announced. You know, you've got the do you want to describe them? The MoFi, which is I know your favorite product.
Yeah, the MoFi, they're a small router manufacturer, but they've been around for years. They have been off and on very popular option with our audience. We've long been frustrated with their user interface, but they tend to come out with quality hardware, and also some of the newer modems. They're able to integrate that faster than some of the bigger manufacturers.
Yeah, and then next up is Peplink, which is one of our favorite providers at the Mobile Internet Resource Center. Um, they have just in the last month brought out their first X65 product, which was their MBX Mini. That is their flagship enterprise 4X quad modem 5G super router at just under $12,000. Not appropriate for most of our audience, but then they've also announcing, it's actually I think officially being announced tomorrow, but we've gotten clearance to mention it here. The Max BR2 Pro, one of our favorite high-end devices, dual 5G, is being upgraded from the X62 to the X65, and they kept the price the same. It's $28.99, so it's still a very expensive router, but it is within the realm of professional use. You know, people who want to have two high-end 5G devices, that has been actually pretty popular in our audience for people who have the higher end demands. And now that the modules are certified, because the Peplink hardware all carries a similar architecture, we expect that they'll be moving the X65 throughout their product line, particularly their higher end product line, as the year goes on. So kind of displacing the X62, so you'll be getting more performance at the same price. And this is kind of the story of 2025, as we're seeing the X65 pushing the X62 down to where it was intended to be. The 62 version generation is supposed to be the lower cost mainstream, and the 65 being the pro devices. And we'll probably see that trend continue in the market of pro versus mainstream now that all these modules are finally FCC certified and moving out. But now 65 versus 62, what are the differences? What makes one, they're the same family, the same generation, what makes one better or worse? You want to talk some of that?
Yes, well, like you said, they are the same generation. They have the same basic capabilities, but the X62 is specifically designed to be a lower cost, lower performing device. And one of the reasons for that you can see on the screen is it doesn't have as high a carrier aggregation. So it can, with 5G, it can aggregate two carriers for a total of 120 megahertz of bandwidth, where the X65 has three times carrier aggregation for a total of 300 megahertz, and that is a substantial performance difference. But the caveat to that is that the tower that you are connected to has to be able to support uh, that level of 5G
Mhm.
carrier aggregation. You need a 5G standalone connection, which we'll talk about later. Um, and you need to have the bandwidth available to fill that full 300 megahertz of spectrum. And
Right.
so you're not going to get that everywhere. It's going to be very location dependent. It's going to
Mhm.
depend on which carrier you're connected to, how
Right.
upgrade their tower is, etc.
Right. And so you see the kind of the peak theoretical performance of the X65 has got enough CPU and RF processing capabilities to do 10 gigabits per second, which is insanely fast. And the X62 is less than half of that, just 4.4 gigabits per second, which is still kind of insanely fast. But again, those are peak theoretical lab condition raw theoretical numbers. Real world potential speeds would be a fraction of that, but um, it still gives you kind of a relative sense of the peak potential performance. But the biggest thing is going to be, is your carrier broadcasting multiple bands? Are they doing three 5G bands simultaneously in your area in a way that can be combined? And for the most part in the US, AT&T and Verizon really aren't doing that much, but T-Mobile already has been for quite a while. They're like particularly like a band combination of band 71, 41, and 25 is a band combination that T-Mobile smartphones have been taking advantage of for several years now, or a year and a half now. The X62 can't combine all three bands at once. It has to pick two of them, and that is throwing away a bunch of potential performance and maybe some maybe a little bit of coverage. Whereas the X65, it can do three 5G bands at once. So on T-Mobile, we expect there's going to be some places where you'll see some very substantial advantages with the X65 versus the X62. On the other carriers, in a lot of ways, we're still waiting for the carriers to catch up, to put their networks to a place where that will really matter. So over time, that'll matter more. The other thing we've known about the 65 and the 62 is the upload performance is going to be basically the same. They both do, at least the modules that have come to market don't do upload carrier aggregation. So in that case, their architectures are the same. So is if you have a X62 device, we know people have been buying them for the past year, is upgrading to the X65 worth it? Probably not, but certainly if you have an X55, it's a huge new world, and if you're on T-Mobile, might be something to consider and or more future-proof. X65 is something to go with. Now, what about the future? Should people hold out for the X72 and 75, which might make it to routers next year? Maybe even sooner. Maybe Cradlepoint's got a module that is potentially getting FCC approved soon. So we might be seeing X72 generation stuff. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this is the next generation. There will be several significant improvements, not just to performance, but for efficiency and other factors. And there's already a consumer hotspot out with the X75, which is the Netgear M7 Pro, a hotspot for AT&T. Um, and currently, there's only one module approved that's used in routers uh, by the FCC for use in the US. That's an X72 module. As Chris said, there is recently announced Ericsson Cradlepoint router that's coming out with that probably sometime this spring or summer. And so that will be the first device. And we expect probably the X72 because that's going to be the lower cost module, and we'll probably get the FCC approval sooner for the other module types to start coming out on routers, uh, maybe more this year, or we probably more likely will see them
Yeah,
more in the next year, early
right.
2026. One thing to keep in mind is that these modems are quite a bit faster, and so a router's internals and the CPU and other parts of the router need to be fast enough to keep up with the speeds that it's capable of. So router manufacturers are probably going to be wanting to upgrade their hardware to account for that.
Yeah.
For example, the Peplink routers right now have the pro level routers have a gigabit per second throughput. this new Cradle Point router that's coming out has a 1.9 gigabit per second throughput. So that one
Yeah.
is going to have those faster internals.
Yeah, we're definitely getting to the point where the modems are getting faster than the CPUs and the routers. So hopefully they come back more into balance, particularly before the cell networks catch up to actually be able to potentially deliver some of those speeds. And we're going to be facing one really interesting trade-off is when the X70, if the X72 seems to come to market before the X75, is the 72 is a sequel to the 62, and it's better than the 62 in every way. It's got 200 megahertz of bandwidth versus 120. It's got 3x carrier aggregation as opposed to 2x. So it's a big step up from the 62, but it's actually in some ways a step down from the X65. The X65's got can process 300 megahertz of bandwidth, whereas the X72 can do 200 because it's the lower end, more mainstream thing. So there'll be potentially a period in the market where people will be faced with, hey, I've got an X65 with higher potential peak download speeds, or an X72 with slightly slower peak download speeds, but potentially much higher upload speeds until the X75 devices come to the market that give you the best of both. So there's always going to be these interesting trade-offs as how things evolve and percolate down to the router market. And it's kind of geeky and fun to dig into what's going on behind the scenes and all the specs and the technical details. But and also in other ways, well, all of this stuff is pretty awesome, and the cell networks still need to evolve to catch up to them. Now, some other 5G notes of what's been going on in 5Gs. Well, first off, I'll talk about the millimeter wave side of things. Is back when 5G first launched, millimeter wave was part of the core focus, and particularly for Verizon, this is where they would show multi-gigabit speeds with millimeter wave signals. These are super high frequency signals that are part of the 5G standard that travel very short distance, but are very, very fast. And that made for really great demos. And you can put millimeter wave towers inside stadiums or shopping malls or airports and give really great performance and speed. But what we're seeing now is the carriers and even Verizon, which was the biggest millimeter wave champion in the world, are all putting millimeter wave on the back burner. Some carriers are even giving back to the FCC some of their millimeter wave licenses because it's just not proving to be super practical for bigger audiences, and it requires a lot of extra electronics in the cellular devices. It requires special antenna modules that were only ever put on high-end cell phones, and only particularly ones targeting the Verizon market. A lot of other devices are just leaving millimeter wave off, and in fact, Apple's new modem that they're bringing out abandons millimeter wave entirely. So we're thinking millimeter wave is taking a generation off. It might come back in 5G eventually to take things to a really higher level when you really need it. But right now, the mid-band spectrum has been providing enough speed and enough capacity that that's become the focus. And we're actually seeing millimeter wave not really matter. Now, I want to ask you about 5G standalone versus non-standalone, and what does that mean, and why does that matter, and what's up with that?
Well, 5G standalone versus non-standalone are the two ways that a cellular device can connect to a 5G network. To put it simply, a non-standalone mode still requires an LTE connection as an anchor connection. And then what happens is that the tower and the cellular device, they will layer 5G bands on top of that LTE connection to boost your download speeds. But with the 5G NSA connection, you're still limited because you're connecting to an LTE network. Your uploads are going to go over that LTE uh, carrier band, and if you get connected to a slow LTE band, that can impact your performance to a significant degree. By contrast, 5G standalone is a pure 5G connection, so there's no LTE involved at all, and that can give you all the advantages of what 5G has long promised and offered, where you get lower latency and power usage. You can have higher speeds, and eventually you'll be able to get um, the carrier aggregation on uploads for significantly higher upload speeds. So
Mm-hmm.
5G standalone is really the future. Non-standalone is a technology that's basically designed to ease the transition between LTE and 5G so that it is as
Yeah.
seamless as possible for the device user.
hmm And so that's kind of got tease us up nicely to go into the next section of this talk, which is going to be taking a look at where the different cell carriers are and deploying their networks and taking advantage of this technology to really bring out 5G. But before that, just want to mention that the Mobile Internet Resource Center is viewer supported, and so we're going to let Sheree tell you a little bit about that, and we'll be back live in about 30 seconds.
This content is made possible by our premium members over at the Mobile Internet Resource Center. We strive to create unbiased content for our audience. We are not sponsored, we're not driven by affiliate sales, and we don't sell stuff. We are here to provide unbiased content, and for that, we are funded by our members. And our members get a lot of additional perks for their support. So please, if mobile internet is an important part of your lifestyle, consider supporting us.
Thank you, Cherie, for that virtual pitch, because the Mobile Internet Resource Center is amazing and fabulous, and we really welcome you to join us. If you're watching this MIRC Live, use the code MIRC Live if you go sign up, and you'll get $10 off joining. You could dive deeper and geek out with us in our forums and everything else. So come over there if you'd like. Now, let's talk about the cellular carriers, and T-Mobile remains the 5G leader in particular because, well, they've been the world leader in deploying technologies like 5G standalone. I think they've been how far ahead are they?
For the U.S. carriers, they are significantly ahead of AT&T and Verizon in terms of 5G deployments. And the big advantage they had is they were able to get a lot of 600 megahertz spectrum in a spectrum auction that they were able to dedicate to 5G. And with the merger with Sprint several years ago, they acquired a lot of the spectrum and assets from Sprint, and they were able to just roll that in to dedicated 5G. The other carriers weren't really able to do that because almost all of their spectrum assets were tied up with their existing LTE networks. So that's really given T-Mobile a boost, and they have 5G standalone widely deployed at this point. And at the recent Mobile World Conference, they announced that they're going to roll out 5G advanced technologies in 2025, greater amounts of carrier aggregation, and things like network slicing, which is an advanced type of prioritization that's for 5G only, and some other technologies that the other carriers really aren't able to do yet.
Yeah. So what we've got the screenshots here are two different screenshots of the app that actually we first wrote 10 years ago that tracks coverage maps for the different carriers, and you can see how T-Mobile's nationwide 5G coverage map has really expanded just in the last year and a half since the update on the left to the right. And they've got the most rural coverage and the most suburban and urban coverage with mid-band and fast performance, and their network is really several steps ahead of pushing 5G technology. So if you've got, one of these most advanced modems, it's going to have the most potential to tap into extra performance and 5G features when you are on T-Mobile. Now let's take a look at the next carrier is Verizon. Now tell us what's up with Verizon's 5G technology deployments.
Well, as you can see from the map, their 5G deployments are not nearly as wide ranging as T-Mobile's are. They are a distant second behind T-Mobile, and where Verizon is getting most of its current 5G deployments is with new mid-band spectrum that they've just been able to turn online in the last year or so on band N77. Because, like I said again, most of their other spectrum assets were tied up into their LTE network. So this new mid-band N77 spectrum is being dedicated to 5G. And where you have access to that spectrum, Verizon can be really, really fast because they
Mm-hmm.
do have a lot of N77. And if you are able to tap into that, you can see some great performance.
Yeah.
So they're still building that out. The coverage map for that is still going to grow. For their longer range low band 5G, they're still using a technology called dynamic spectrum sharing, which is basically using the same spectrum with LTE and 5G simultaneously that, again, is a technology that is designed to transition easily from 4G to 5G, but it does come with some downsides in terms of performance.
Yeah. So we expect, every place we've seen Verizon's network improve a lot in our travels over the past year. And again, when you have Verizon, it can be absolutely amazing. And the big thing we're waiting to see is, when is Verizon going to flip the switch and turn on 5G standalone mode and stop relying on non-standalone and on their underlying 4G network? That is going to be the interesting twist. They've been showing that technology for years now, but they have not deployed it to consumers yet, only to kind of certain enterprise partners. And Verizon is very conservative when they go towards moving their network and wanting things to not have glitches and breaks and stuff. So we're eager to see when Verizon flips that switch and starts to really take advantage of the next generation of 5G. They've clearly built a really great foundation, but we still will give them second place to T-Mobile by far. Now, AT&T, their map looks pretty impressive, but
Yeah, AT&T is still in last place when it comes to true 5G, and the map looks more impressive, and most of that is because AT&T was able to designate small slices of their 850 megahertz spectrum and dedicate that for 5G. But it's very small slices of spectrum, so it's not very speedy.
yeah,
And they still use that dynamic spectrum sharing in a lot of cases too, where they're sharing LTE and 5G. They
yeah,
do also have mid-band on N77, but they're in a different frequency range in the N77 band than Verizon is. And because of some regulatory and other issues, they weren't able to turn on their N77 until fairly recently. So their build out of that mid-band spectrum is
mm,
lagging behind Verizon, but they are working really hard to catch up, and they're
mhm,
really aggressively deploying
yeah.
that N77 spectrum.
Yeah, so the places where they have the true mid-band 5G, and we've put the feature into the coverage app that you can turn off the nationwide 5G, because particularly on AT&T, the nationwide 5G, it might show as 5G on your phone, but it really is no better than 4G. It's technically 5G, but it's nothing to write home about. But the mid-band 5G, and you could turn on the little toggle on that coverage app and see where there's mid-band, that can perform really great. But the catch, one of the big catches that we've written about several times at the Mobile Internet Resource Center, is their band N77 that they're using was only compatible with the release 16 modem. So the 65 and 62 can connect to that, but the older 5G phase one devices, the X55, which was in so many first generation routers, it's invisible. They cannot connect to AT&T's mid-band network. So we've been warning people for years of, like, you're missing out on AT&T completely, AT&T's good 5G completely, unless you have at least a X65, 62 generation router or phone or anything like that. So that's kind of the state of AT&T 5G. And a little pro tip for AT&T: sometimes it's still, you will actually get better performance if you turn off 5G and switch back to 4G on AT&T in some markets, because their 5G is a little saturated. There's less and less people on 4G now, and they still are in this awkward transition phase. So that's the state of AT&T, and kind of bringing up the rear. And then we got Dish. Who's Dish? What's that?
Well, Dish or Boost Mobile, they've had some confusing marketing, which has been part of their problem, is the fourth major carrier. And when the FCC and regulatory authorities approved the merger between Sprint and T-Mobile, one of the requirements is that they had to give up some spectrum and assets to Dish so that they could create a fourth carrier, so that we would maintain having four carriers in the marketplace for competitive purposes. Now, they did not have an existing LTE network, so they are building a 5G network from scratch, and it's going to be 5G only. There won't be any 4G at all, so you don't have
Five.
to worry about or yeah, 5G only. So you don't have to worry about um, non-standalone mode. Everything is 5G standalone with Dish Network, and they have grown the network a lot, where at least according to Dish, they cover 280 million Americans currently.
Hmm.
But their big problem is they've been struggling to gain customers and market share. And there's several different reasons for that. But the plus side, if you do have a Dish plan, is that the network is very uncongested. And Chris can tell you
Yeah.
some of the incredible speeds that they're able to see when connected to Dish.
Yeah. The thing that's really kind of amusing about Dish is because they offered data only hotspot plans for only a brief period of time when they first came out, and so people who were lucky enough to get this plan, which is only $20 a month, um, it still continues to work in routers. In fact, that's one of the two connections I'm bonding together for this broadcast right now. And when you're in a Dish native area, it performs wonderfully because you're like the only one person on a highway. Um, but Dish no longer offers data only plans at all, only smartphone plans, only targeting kind of the low end of the market via Boost Mobile. And so we're kind of keeping an eye on their network growing. But for the time being, unless you happen to be lucky enough to have gotten in on those early plans that we gave people heads up at the Mobile Internet Resource Center about get this while you could. If you didn't grab it then, well, you got to just wait until hopefully Dish comes out with a new generation of data only plans because the network has gone from being very marginal to decent, at least when you're in the areas where it works. And then when it's not, Dish does have roaming agreements with both T-Mobile and AT&T. So it's been one of my favorite plans, and I wish I could encourage more people to get it, but I can't. So it's Dish. That's the state of Dish. Now, before we talk about the future and how cellular and satellite are coming together, and also how we're getting to 6G from here, Shree's going to spend 30 seconds talking about these cool shirts that we're wearing.
Like my shirt? We've gotten so many comments on our mobile and connected shirt that we have made them available to you. Go over to rvmobileinternet.com/shirt. You'll go to our Bonfire store where you can order your own shirt as well in a variety of colors and styles. It's a great way to help support our content here at the Mobile Internet Resource Center, even if you don't want to become a member.
And these are legitimately cool shirts because we don't like advertising. There's no URL, there's no go here, no RV Mobile Internet or anything. It's just a cool shirt because we like cool shirts. And so we've actually seen a lot of people jump in because they like cool shirts as well. And I don't like branded shirts or anything like that. So check it out. If you want to support us and or you just want a cool shirt, check out the Bonfire store. Now, let's talk about the future. Satellite and cellular merging. This has been a big topic, and we're not going to dive too far into it now because we've done prior videos, and we're going to be doing another future broadcast and major feature story like this in the not too distant future, focusing on satellite. But if you want to just kind of give an update of what's the state of satellite and cellular coming together.
Yes, well, it's an interesting and complex topic, but satellite, sort of in the technical lingo, is called a non-terrestrial network, or NTN network. And basically, this is having kind of like a cell tower in space that can communicate with your phone. And these are primarily intended, at least for now, to sort of fill the gaps in coverage maps and provide emergency services, especially in the less paved boony areas where there isn't cell coverage, so that people, if they get injured or something, they can call for help, text loved ones to make sure that they know that they're okay, and that sort of thing. And so there's lots of different companies working on this. Apple has its own system that's built into recent iPhones, iPhone 14 and later. There's Starlink, which has an agreement with T-Mobile to provide supplemental coverage from space, and Starlink is also has contracts with other providers in different parts of the globe to provide the same coverage in other countries. Google is also working on this with a built-in capability for Android phones similar to Apple. And then AST Space Mobile is a relatively new company that's developing a system that will work similar to what Starlink provides with T-Mobile, of providing that supplemental coverage from space to fill in those gaps in coverage areas.
Yes. And the important thing we always try to point out to people is that this is not broadband from space. This is not replacing cell towers. This is filling in the gaps. And in particular, for the first generation of all of this, it is not for data. It is basically just text messaging now. And actually, Andy just did a video and a test comparing Starlink T-Mobile connection, a connection with an Apple Global Star connection out in the mountains of Colorado where he's at, where he had no cell signal and he was able to do some text messaging. So again, this is not what you're going to be connecting your router via and streaming all the things anytime soon. But over time, this technology is evolving, and the cellular industry standards are actually defining the ways that the cellular devices can more efficiently talk to the satellites and blend in satellite coverage with cellular tower coverage to give you maybe a little bit of data and manage connections wherever you go. So we've got a pretty exciting future ahead with a lot of interesting competitors that are doing some cool stuff. And again, we will have a much deeper dive into this in our future satellite industry update and videos. So stay tuned for when we get around to doing that. Now, we're going to talk about 6G. What isn't 5G enough? How many Gs do we need? What's next?
Well, the 3GPP, they are planners, and they've planned very far ahead for what the next generation of cellular is going to be, which is 6G. They already have a logo. You can see it up on there. And they've already started a lot of the initial studies and groundwork to define what 6G is and what the 6G standard is going to be. And we expect that the first standard will be finalized for that around 2030, so in about 5 years. Uh, Between now and then, 5G is going to continue to evolve. We have the 5G advanced standard out now and the first devices for that. And that is going to progress with a couple more iterations of the standards to further improve all the advancements that we've seen in 5G up to this point.
The important thing is basically ever since the beginning of the 4G era, that was the 4G's tagline was LTE, which was long-term evolution. The industry put a lot of thought into thinking about how each generation would evolve and introduce new capabilities, but still remain backwards compatible and evolve in kind of a controlled way with major steps every decade. So we saw 4G hit in 2010-ish, 5G 2020. We'll see 6G in 2030, and if the world still exists, we'll see 7G in 2040. This is kind of a cycle that is intended to have major milestones every decade, and then throughout the decade several iterations. The early iterations become kind of quickly obsolete, and then once you get to the middle of the generations, then it becomes something that will stick around and be compatible in a really good way all the way until the next major generation. And that's kind of where we are with 5G now. Is there will be several more iterations of 5G that squeeze out more performance. A lot of that will be stuff that mostly the cell carriers care about at the tower level, but the devices that you're buying now will probably be still very functional and high performance all the way up until the 6G era, and then you could start contemplating when it's time to move on. So here's some of the 6G expectations that they're the marketing the angle of the 3G standards of the industry standards are starting to talk about is more frequency bands, crazy massive theoretical speed improvements, not real world. Again, even lower latency and better energy efficiency and better integration with satellite. And it's just the start. We'll see what actually percolates out in, well, 5 more years. Now, let's talk about 4G. Is it dead yet? Should we everybody throw their 4G stuff away?
No, 4G is not dead yet. In fact, it's still going strong, especially with AT&T and Verizon. They still have very robust LTE networks that can perform very well in a lot of places. And like we've said before, the 5G standards and what will eventually be the 6G standard, they are designed to be backward compatible and coexist with earlier generations. So LTE can stick around for a while because 5G was designed to coexist with LTE and provide a seamless transition. So that's going to give the carriers time to build out their 5G networks, and then they can start moving some of that spectrum that's used for LTE over to 5G, and then eventually the LTE networks will be sunset. But that's not going to happen for a while yet. The carriers really have not started refarming any of that spectrum in any serious way. So LTE is not going away anytime soon.
Well, they have been a lot of what was Sprint's LTE band 41 became T-Mobile's 5G N41. So some of the carriers are taking spectrum and turning it from 4G to 5G, but they're leaving a good solid base of 4G around because there's such a large installed base. But what we will see is the peak performance of, like, at the end of the 4G era, there were some areas where you can get some really amazing performance. That those performance layers, that extra spectrum that was giving that kind of peak performance in 4G, those are going to be turned over to 5G in more and more places. And so 4G will keep working, it'll keep you connected, but you might not necessarily have the peaks and the full speed experience anymore that you might have used to. So we are definitely well into the era where it makes sense to consider upgrading your 4G devices if they're focused on needing performance. If they're just, home monitoring or, basic things like that, or, your watches, all the watches are still 4G. There's no need for 5G when you're doing just text messaging type stuff. So those things will continue to work for a very, very long time. Now we're about to wrap this up and switch to live Q&A mode. I've got a few questions queued up, but if you've got more, put them into the chat right now, and we will start taking them. But quick one other before I take to the questions. Just a reminder that if you go join the Mobile Internet Resource Center and you mention the code MIRC live, that means you watch this video and we'll give you $10 off. Come join us. If you don't need to join us, we'd love that people share our content and do everything else. So if you don't want to join us, just like this, share this, spread the word that we try to give good quality, unbiased content. So support us one way or another, because, well, that's how we try to support you. So we really appreciate our viewers, and we really, really appreciate our mobile internet aficionados. Those are our members. But now let's dive into Q&A time. And I think I marked a few of them here. And okay. So there we are. So Angel asked, what do you think about the T-Mobile internet system on the mobile network? So we covered T-Mobile. He asked this before we got to that T-Mobile slide. I don't know if you've got any particular further questions about T-Mobile, but T-Mobile's network, yay! That's actually, we're broadcasting via a combo of Dish and Mobile Must Have Roam Link, which is currently using T-Mobile as its underlying network. So T-Mobile often is amazingly good. Really good network. But again, there's no single one best network anywhere you go. So having multiple carriers on board is our number one tip. Redundancy is key. This is a question I think you could answer, Andy, from Angel as well. Do carriers have real 5G or fake systems?
Well, they do all have real 5G. A lot of people, I think, maybe not understand how the transition from LTE to 5G is working, especially with the non-standalone mode that was discussed before. Um, so they do all have real 5G. Now, the one sort of exception to this is probably AT&T,
Hmm.
and that's because they have something that they call a marketing term called 5GE or 5G evolution. And they've been prevented from using this in their advertising because it's not actually 5G. 5G evolution is just advanced 4G.
Yes.
Um,
It was really
AT&T wanted to try to get ahead of the game and played a little fast and rules with their marketing.
AT&T knew they were destined to be in last place as the 5G era came in, just the way their network was set up, but they had a really good 4G network. And so their argument was the areas where their 4G network was evolved so far that it was evolving towards 5G, they felt justified in putting the little 5GE logo on people's phones, and people thought they had 5G, but no, it's just really good 4G. That was AT&T being pretty darn fake. Now we got a question from Bert here saying, should I be waiting for a hotspot jetpack device to come out with X65 or 70? And Andy, I think there's already options.
Yeah, all the flagship level hotspots at this point are the X65 series or the X75. So mobile hotspots are generally carrier specific, at least the first generation of them, and so they're optimized for use on a particular carrier. So we do have a gear center and also a guide on mobile hotspots that goes into all the details on that. But if you have an older generation mobile hotspot that doesn't have one of those newer modems, you can certainly upgrade.
Yeah. Yeah, and the hotspot market, because the hotspots are more akin to cell phones, they evolve faster, they're more consumer oriented, so they don't have that intentional slower pace like the routers do. But then again, they also often have intentional hobbling, whereas the hotspots don't have, they're not designed to work across multiple carriers. So they're kind of, even though the chip inside of them supports all the carriers, they might intentionally have certain bands disabled, so it's optimized for AT&T or optimized for Verizon or so forth. So we often steer people, if they're really wanting to be connected, hotspots are great, but routers are often more capable, even though they might technically be a generation further behind on paper. And Bert actually points out one of the other downsides of hotspots is most of the flagship hotspots don't have antenna ports, or the ones that do, well, they might only have two antenna ports for MIMO, and all 5G devices rely on typically four antennas. And so the hotspots, when they're using, they have internally four antennas, but if you want to use external antennas, you're cutting their capabilities in half. Whereas routers, 5G routers, typically have four antenna ports. And okay, one more come in. Here we are. Okay, so School Ruler says, do you think we could get to the point that unlimited mobile hotspot could become common and affordable compared to wired internet connections? This is a interesting question.
Yeah, well, that's the key. That's the key question. We've been hoping for that for years, and to be fair, the carriers are doing that with their fixed wireless services that are intended to compete with landline internet service providers. T-Mobile's home internet service, for example, is the most famous of these, and Verizon has is rolling that out aggressively in areas where they don't have their FiOS cable system, and AT&T is converting a lot of its old copper DSL customers over to the fixed wireless access using 5G. So, but as far as mobile use goes, it is much rarer um, to have that sort of unlimited data with no strings attached.
Yeah,
Um,
but
but
but it
hopefully, yeah,
the
hopefully there will be more options in the
Yeah.
future.
And there are options out there, both if you're lucky enough to jump on them when they're available and then hold on to them. So like we've got a whole history of plans at the Mobile Internet Resource Center that we've advised people on, that grab them while you can, because once the carriers realize how these plans are being used in the market, they might cut them off, but they often grandfather people in. That's why I'm broadcasting over a $20 a month unlimited dish plan that roams unlimited onto AT&T and T and T-Mobile. And there's things like the old Verizon PUDP, which is still passed around and sold from person to person, the old Verizon unlimited plans. And there are higher cost plans. Like actually we had a question here about the T-Mobile Away plan, which is the T-Mobile's unlimited plan that lets you take their service on the road. It's a little bit pricey, but there's kind of a question of that. I don't think we want to dive too deep into the Away plan because it's getting off topic for this video, but it is yeah, there are plans out there. And if you go over to the Mobile Internet Resource Center and look at our plan picks page, we keep track of the best alternative plans that let people have kind of home internet like options while traveling and while being nomadic. And there are options out there, and there are ways to kind of combine multiple options sometimes and usually piece together a really great solution. But it's not just the simple, easy, and cheap always. You might have to do some homework. So go over and check out the plan picks page, and see Cherie just threw the link into the chat. And then, yeah, and Guns pointed out that unlimited AT&T iPad plan. There's like great unlimited plans that are limited to tablets. So if you can focus your high bandwidth usage on tablets and then maybe watch your TV, hook your TV up to HDMI to a tablet, you have unlimited streaming on your tablet, but still you're watching it on your giant 70-inch screen. So there's very clever ways to find unlimited data. It's just not necessarily through the front door. I got a few other quick questions here, and I think we're going to be wrapping this up. And I think here Chris is asking, do we have any comment? Oh, okay, good. Then I think we are. Okay, Terry's got a question on. I have a legacy Verizon PUDP with a SIM and an Seago MiFi X Pro 5G, and have been seeing huge speed deprioritization. Have you seen this as well? And is it nationwide? And any tricks to get around this? And I think you researched this a little bit, Andy. Did you?
Yes. So what we found, and it's not 100% confirmed yet, but um, with the Verizon PUDP, if it's connected to that new Verizon mid-band spectrum N77, is that it gets throttled to 30 megabits per second when connected to N77. We've had several reports from our members about this. Um, the the information is still not totally confirmed, but there's definitely something going on there. And Verizon has always been a little bit weird with how it's treated mid-band as part of its 5G ultra-wideband sort of network as distinct from its nationwide network. We won't get into the details of that here, but there may be that may be something related that's going on with this.
Okay. So yeah, that's the sort of depth that we can dive into more in our member forum. So people who do want to kind of like ask particularly details about some of these interesting plans and the twists and the tricks and everything, we do have member forums over at the Mobile Internet Resource Center where we can geek out more about plans and discuss things that we wouldn't necessarily want to discuss on a public YouTube forum as well. So again, please, if you're interested and you want to geek out further about this stuff, come over and join us at the Mobile Internet Resource Center. And I think with that, I'm probably going to wrap up this broadcast because we have crossed an hour mark. This was a big one, jam-packed full with all sorts of good stuff. And Andy, I really want to thank you for joining me tonight and that awesome article that you did and all the tons of research and yeah, you saved me from doing that because I did it the last time around, and you did an excellent job. And really, really thank you on that.
Well, I appreciate it, and it's great to be part of this team, and it's really great to be part of this community and to be able to help our viewers and especially our members navigate, this complex topic and with all the other complex topics related to mobile internet. So it's really a joy to be able to
Yeah.
help people find solutions that work for them.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to have some one-on-one time with Andy as well, we do have advising sessions that our members can book. So, if you want to hang out with him and go deep into your personal setup, he does virtual house calls, so you can go as well do other team members, not just Andy as well. But yes, you can go deeper with us in the forums and or booking advising sessions. But again, I'm going to wrap this up one last time. If you want to go join us, you could save $10. We use the code MIRC Live when you join. Take advantage of all these perks. And it's been an hour, so good night, everybody. Thank you, Sharif, for the awesome link wizarding back there in the back. And I am ending this. Goodbye.